presidential election in US history in which the Supreme Court was directly involved. In the earlier one, there was an indirect role that the Supreme Court had played. Role of US Supreme Court in a presidential election in the current context. With confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett, a Supreme Court has clear majority of conservative judges. What could this mean? We'll discuss that further. This does not necessarily imply that the court will take sides. So in the present context, the constitution of the Supreme Court judges is also being looked at very, very carefully. We'll further analyze that aspect besides other aspects coming from this poll outcome, which is now down to the wire, with Professor Harsh Pant, Distinguished Fellow with the Observer Research Foundation. Welcome, Professor Pant, to Midday Prime. Is the poll outcome now hinging on Nevada and the courts?
Yes, it seems that it is hinging on Nevada. It is, and the Pennsylvania issue is going all the way to the courts. Of course, you have Mr. Trump, who has also filed lawsuits in regarding other states like Michigan. And he's asking for a recount in Wisconsin, in I think Georgia. So clearly, I think first stakes are too high for Mr. Trump. So and his path to victory is very narrow compared to Mr. Biden, who really needs one more state, and that's it. So there's going to be a fight for the last ballot, and I think Mr. Trump last night made it very clear that he intends to go all the way to the Supreme Court. Though you can't really go to the Supreme Court directly, he will have to fight his battles in the lower courts first, and then hope that those lower courts would produce enough material for him to contest in the Supreme Court.
So would it be fair to say that the election could be called today, even though counting may continue?
It might, yes. If one of these states, which is still in the reckoning, where still the margin of error and the vote percentage is very close, goes to Mr. Biden, I think there is a possibility that the elections might be called for Mr. Biden. I think if on the other hand, Mr. Trump continues to be in the reckoning, then I think eventually it will end up in the courts.
The Trump campaign is asking for a recount in Wisconsin and possibly Michigan as well. Wisconsin law allows that if the margin of victory is less than 1%. So he may be entitled given the threshold of victory. But what do you think that will show in the coming days? And does that remind you of the 2000 election?
Yes, it does. In some ways, it is similar, but also it's the vote percentage and the contestation. I think this time is across the board. Last time it was centered on one particular state in 2000 in Florida, and there were issues pertaining to the ballot and its structure. This time the issues are more amorphous. I don't think there is any any significant case that Mr. Trump can make about illegality or something unlawful happening. But there are suspicions that is a possibility. I think it's more of a political posturing for him at this point, because he needs to be in the reckoning. He needs to confuse the system a bit, and he needs to make a case that look, it ain't over till it's over, as they say in the States. So I think he will go. He plans to take it to the wire. As it is, it's a very close contest, and in a lot of these states, we have seen back and forth between over the last few hours. In fact, if you recall, yesterday it was Mr. Trump who was leading even in places like Wisconsin and Michigan, and today they have been called for Mr. Biden, because a lot of these postal ballots that came later, that came earlier were counted later in these states. So I think it's one of those peculiarities of the American system that is producing this concentration, and the fact that none of the candidates have been able to mobilize or have been able to garner a really sweep kind of a mandate. That the mandate is very fractured, the country is very polarized, and I think both, especially for Mr. Trump, this might be an opportunity to continue to stake his claim for White House.
Absolutely, and you told us earlier that it is the state courts that have to decide first before the matter can come to the US Supreme Court, and that the Supreme Court can only adjudicate if there is a violation which is claimed of constitutional rights. Having said that, the US Supreme Court has a clear conservative majority. Can that play a role in the final decision of the Supreme Court if it really comes to that?
If it comes to that, certainly Mr. Trump and his campaign would be hoping that he might get some respite. But it's not entirely evident to me what Supreme Court justices can actually do, because if if there is an argument to be made about some irregularity with some empirical evidence, then obviously the lower courts are also there. So first they will adjudicate that case. And if Mr. Trump and his campaign feels that they have not been treated fairly, then they can certainly approach the Supreme Court. But I don't think that Supreme Court justices are going to deliver a verdict on such a technical matter, depending on whether they are conservative leaning or leaning to the left. I think the matter will come down to the technicalities. The matter will come down to the procedures and structures in American system. And I think the verdict will be delivered primarily based on what the empirical realities are presented and how the matter is contested before the Supreme Court.
Considering the division that we are seeing in the popular vote between the two candidates, it doesn't look like anywhere close to an outright rejection of Donald Trump.
Not at all. I think Mr. Trump has done very well compared to what we were hearing before elections. And I think, again, it points to the fact that, a lot of the media, perhaps in America, and the elite who decide a lot of these headlines need to get their act together, because two successive elections, there has been some disconnect, a lot of disconnect between the elites and the actual voting and the actual vote on the ground. And in fact, if you look at the numbers, Mr. Trump seems to have done extremely well with all voting blocs. There was a talk of racial divide. Mr. Trump has doubled his vote percent with African Americans. Hispanics have voted for him. Even women voters who we were told are moving away from Mr. Trump, he has increased his vote percentage there. So clearly something is happening in the American body politic that I think observers, external actors, are not really contending with. And Mr. Trump perhaps has a better pulse of the American population, and he was able to better frame this election than many of us expected.
If counting delays the outcome or the results by weeks, then how would it impact the current US administration and the transition if Biden is to win this election?
Well, there's certainly the paralysis is not good for any government, for any system. And if the two campaigns are busy litigating, if they're busy with claims and counterclaims in courts, and certainly administration would get affected. Now, a lot of this, I think, is the American system has made provisions for this. So, in the last 2 months of any incumbent government, a government that is either about to change hands or is about to continue, you always have this phase where the bureaucracy takes over, and I think a lot of this would happen. Automatically, a lot of the decisions would be made, but I think the gravity of the situation in America is such that political decisions are becoming important, whether it's economy, whether it's pandemic. So I think that kind of uncertainty, that kind of paralysis is not good for the American system as a whole. But I think they can manage till mid-December, when I think the laws are such that the Electoral College has to meet. So I think there is a deadline when they have to come to a decision, and I think courts will have to respect that deadline as well.
Elections to the US Senate and House of Representatives have also taken place, and there we are seeing that polls project that as far as the House is concerned, the Democrats are leading, so it's going to be status quo perhaps there, and as far as the Senate is concerned, the Republicans are leading, so there too there could be a status quo. But with the Senate not with him, how difficult would it be for Joe Biden, who's in his initial months would be looking at a big economic stimulus and would need bipartisan support for that in both houses?
Well, not at all, and I think it's going to be very challenging for Mr. Biden, because a lot of his campaign, it seemed had assumed that this is going to be a year when Democrats are going to sweep to power across various branches of the government, and this was an assumption that Democrats were making. If you look at the ambitious agenda that they had laid out for themselves, that they would change the rules on filibuster, they would pass the stimulus package, that they would also go out for tax increases, all of that is now in limbo. And unless Mr. Biden is able to quickly produce a consensus document, a consensus policy package, I think he's going to find it very difficult, because not only you have a Senate which will be under the control of the Republicans, but also you will end up having a greater internecine warfare within the Democratic Party itself, where the progressives think that they should be in the leading, they should lead the policy package. On the other hand, you will have now conservative Democrats who will look at the verdict and say, well, we can't afford to go further left, because clearly the mandate is such that in the Rust Belt, in the Sun Belt, in the hinterland, people have voted for centrism. They have not voted for the so-called progressive left mandate. So it's going to be very tough for Mr. Biden, both internally in the Democratic Party as well as working with the Senate.
Well, thank you, Professor Harsh Pant, for joining us with your perspective on the US presidential poll outcome, which is currently hanging in the balance. Joe Biden seems to be closing in, but a lot depends on Nevada, where there are 6 electoral votes up for grabs. So currently, it seems the Democrats are leading there, but it's really coming down to the wire. And Donald Trump's camp has already moved the courts, asking for a stop to counting. Well, let's move on to a developing story on Midday Prime. And now an update from the Bihar Assembly polls, where campaigning is closing this evening for the third and final phase. In Bihar, campaigning for the third and final phase of elections will come to an end this evening. In this phase, 78 constituencies spread over 15 districts will be going to polls on the 7th of November. Polling for by-election to Valmiki Nagar parliamentary seat will also be held in this phase. Stalwarts of the BJP, RJD and Congress are making last-ditch effort to woo the voters. They are addressing series of back-to-back election meetings. Leaders of left parties, including Rashtriya Lok Samta Party or RLSP and Hindustani Awam Morcha or HUM, are also busy in addressing rallies and road shows. With the third phase of voting, the polling process in the poll-bound state of Bihar will be completed. Counting will be held on the 10th of November. Results will be declared on the same day. So we're all standing by for the third and final phase of campaigning in Bihar to come to the close. The third phase of elections are slated to be held on 78 seats on the 7th of November, which is a Saturday. Counting of votes will take place on the 10th of November. 2 phases have already been completed as far as polling is concerned in Bihar. And our correspondent Abhishek, I suppose, is joining us from Darbhanga. Abhishek, if you are with us, what's the flavor of campaign this time around in the third phase?
So, Bunbun, it's exactly the last-ditch effort for every candidate to woo the voters in their favor. Continuously, we are hearing the voices of their candidates and all those loudspeakers blaring loudly, because they are going to be shut by 5 p.m. today. The campaigning is going to end for third phase polling. Mostly those Simanchal area of Bihar will be for fight this time. BJP and RJD both have a lot at stake, because these were the seats where Mahagathbandhan had a leading number of candidates winning last election. And this time around, BJP, when it is fighting alongside with JDU, would like to have as many seats as possible to continue its governance in Bihar. Nitish Kumar, UP Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath, so many senior cabinet ministers like Rajnath Singh, Dharmendra Pradhan, JP Nadda, BJP chief himself, have been camping and campaigning all across the state to have as many votes possible in favor of BJP and JDU candidates, while Tejasvi Yadav is leaving no stone unturned to garner support from the favorites from the voters in the states. He has been aggressively doing rallies across the state. Like there has been a report where he has done over a dozen rallies in a day. So both sides are working very hard this time around, at least, to have as many seats possible in the last and third phase of Bihar Assembly election.
So you are telling us that Simanchal is going to polls in the third phase and also some parts of North Bihar. What are the issues that matter to voters there?
Munmun, this time, this has been a welcome move in the overall political discourse of Bihar, when people have started talking about developmental issues. People have started, people have asked their candidates to give them assurance over issues of employment, job creation, higher education, medical facility, because this corona pandemic has actually exposed the medical facility and health infrastructure across the nation, and Bihar has not been an exception of poor healthcare facility, because we have for decades Bihar has been one of the least developed area in terms of providing medical facility. And this time around, people are now demanding that these facilities are basic amenities of life, and to deal with such pandemic issues, we should have a better care facility. Both parties, both the side, the incumbent government and the opposition, both are trying to convince their voters that if they are voted back to power, they will do as much as possible. The another thing has been the youth of this state has been very much awake and aware this time around, because in the last several years and decades, we have seen the trembling educational infrastructure has not given enough scope of employment opportunity to the youths of Bihar, and this time around they are asking for their rights of a fair education, their rights for a quality education, and also how a political leadership or a political party is going to provide them enough job opportunities in terms of with a better quality of education and skill development. So otherwise, it used to, in Bihar, it used to be a political discourse very much divided on the basis of caste, religion, and this time these development issues have taken a center stage, and that is a welcome move in this whole political discourse of Bihar, at least.
Abhishek, if you can briefly tell us on whether Nitish Kumar is banking on the support of his silent voters and that of women, and they just be hoping that the turnout in his rallies would convert into votes.
Of course, there. If we see, if the number of crowds or the size of crowd is to be believed, Tejasvi Yadav is also not a small contender this time. He has seen huge crowds amassing during his rallies. Prime Minister himself has led the campaigning from NDA sides. Nitish Kumar is surely banking upon the goodwill that he has created among the women voters by banning liquor in the state, which has been a leading reason to have a better law and order situation, as the government in Bihar has claimed that the liquor ban has been one of the reason why this crime rate has decreased, and social goodwill has also been created. So women voters, of course, have a goodwill for Nitish Kumar. He has also been very popular among women students who are now becoming voters, because in the last several years he has distributed bicycle in schools to the girl students, and those girl students have now become voters. So maybe they can also favor Nitish Kumar for the goodwill that he has created way back a few years back. But overall, we have gathered the vibe that Nitish Kumar has been. It's not going to be a very smooth sail for Nitish Kumar. However, the Modi factor, the Modi charisma, which is backing him as the Chief Minister of a state, is going to certainly help him. Even if his good work of Sushasan will not, the Modi factor is going to help him a lot. But we'll have to see. It's just 4 or 5 days now when we'll be able to know who the people of Bihar has actually elected to govern them for the next 5 years.
Well, thank you, Abhishek, for joining us with those details from Bihar. Union Home Minister Amit Shah is on a visit to West Bengal. He said that BJP will form a 2/3 majority government in the state after next year's polls.
मैं निश्चित रूप से देख रहा हूं कि ममता सरकार का मृत्युगंड बच चुका है। आने वाले दिनों में यहां भारतीय जनता पार्टी की 2/3 बहुमत की सरकार बनने जा रही है। मैं आज बंगाल की जनता को अपील करने आया हूं कि बंगाल एक सरहदी प्रांत है। देश की सुरक्षा बंगाल की आंतरिक सुरक्षा के साथ जुड़ी है। देश की सुरक्षा को सुनिश्चित करने के लिए, बंगाल के युवा को रोजगारी देने के लिए और बंगाल के गरीब लोगों को दारुण गरीबी से बाहर निकालने के लिए इस सरकार को उखाड़कर फेंक दीजिए।
The Union Home Minister accused the state government of obstructing benefits of centre's schemes to the people.
मैं ममता दीदी को बताना चाहता हूं कि आपके मन में भय है कि इन योजनाओं को रोकने से आप भारतीय जनता पार्टी को रोक लोगी, तो आपकी भ्रांति है। आप एक गरीब लोगों के लिए मोदी जी ने जो 6,000 रुपया प्रति साल भेजा है वो पहुंचने दीजिए, स्वास्थ्य की सुविधाएं पहुंचने दीजिए, शौचालय पहुंचने दीजिए, इनका घर उन तक पहुंचने दीजिए, तो शायद थोड़ा बहुत भी आपके लिए सोचेंगे।
So, Home Minister Amit Shah is in West Bengal, and for more on that, we are joined by Anibrato from Bankura. Anibrato, is the former BJP president and now Home Minister at the centre going to take stock of BJP's preparations for next year's assembly polls and also reach out to tribals and refugee families there?
Because as you know, Home Minister Amit Shah earlier when he was BJP president is largely credited for the organization and expansion of BJP here in Bengal. And this time Amit Shah's visit to Jungle Mahal, particularly here in Bankura, has created momentum in the truest sense of word. As you see, BJP is eyeing to capture all the 44 seats, assembly seats here in Jungle Mahal and 12 alone here in Bankura. The thing is that in the last Lok Sabha election, we have found BJP captured all the 4 seats here in Jungle Mahal. As they did in the North Bengal, 7 out of 8 seats they got. They are here in Jungle Mahal too. They got 4 out of 4 seats. The thing is that Amit Shah's visit here in Bankura today is indeed to gauge the mood of the people here and to work out the strategy to unseat the Trinamool Congress from power. You know, that is the basic thing. And Amit Shah is at present holding meeting with the office bearer there at Rabindra Bhavan, and thereafter Amit Shah will proceed here as a Chaturdihi Gram, where we are standing right at this point of time. Here he will have his lunch at a tribal hamlet, Bir Singh Hasda's house, and elaborate arrangement has been done here. This is a tribal village, and the Amit Shah's visit to this area is indeed to gauge the mood of the people. As you know, in the press, Amit Shah alleged that Trinamool Congress unleashed reign of terror here in Bengal, and meanwhile several BJP workers are killed, as he alleged, in the hands of the Trinamool Congress. The thing is that Amit Shah is also said that Trinamool Congress government is depriving the people from several central government schemes, particularly from the Ayushman Bharat and Pradhan Mantri Krishi Yojana, all these things. And he said that if BJP comes to power, as we see that the BJP is eyeing to for 2/3 majority here in Bengal, and if he said that if the BJP government will come to power, they will make Sonar Bangla and will take up all the development projects that are remaining due here.
Anibrato, would it be right to say that the BJP now is concentrating in those areas, for instance in South West Bengal and southwest parts of the state, where it did not do as well as it had done in, say, North Bengal in the Lok Sabha polls?
Yeah, indeed, this area, particularly this Jungle Mahal area, is a backward area. As you know, people are indeed deprived of the basic things that they need in the day-to-day life. The thing is that BJP, as they are concentrating in the North Bengal, they are equally concentrating here in the South Bengal too, particularly in the Jungle Mahal area. And while criticizing the role of the Mamata Banerjee government here, Amit Shah said that Mamata Banerjee government is depriving the people from their basic rights. The central government has taken up several welfare schemes for them. So they are getting deprived, and only if they bring BJP to power here in Bengal, that BJP is largely eyeing, then people here in Bengal will be benefited only.
Well, thank you, Anibrata. Anibrata reporting on the 2-day visit of Home Minister Amit Shah to West Bengal. A lot of people have gathered there to meet him in Bankura. This is going to be a 2-day visit starting today. Let's move on to National Prime. Union Minister of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, Prakash Javadekar, virtually chaired India's CEO Forum on Climate Change. And in his address, Prakash Javadekar said that India is walking the talk on climate change. India is compliant in action and contribution. He said India is asking world leaders and other nations to walk the talk and be compliant with the Paris Agreement.
See, climate change is very important issue to be discussed world over, and world action is needed on this. It is not one country can make a difference. All countries will have to work in that direction.
Extolling Prime Minister Narendra Modi's commitment to climate change, Javadekar said that India's contribution to world emissions is just 6% today.
In a way, by action, our Prime Minister has written that the answer to inconvenient truth is convenient action. And that convenient action path is very important. As we know, historically, world is getting lot of emissions over hundreds of years since Industrial Revolution that has caused climate change. And our responsibility in historical emission is just 3%. Even today, in the present context, our emission load of the world emission load or world is only 6%. So that is also, we are low in the present context. We are absolutely low in the historical context.
Union Minister Prakash Javadekar further urged manufacturing sector to come forward and take initiatives towards conservation of the environment.
Provide money for developing economies to follow the environmental friendly path so that their emission level goes down. And that is what we aim at. So I will just appeal, and I am very sure that many factories are actually doing that they are trying to reduce their emissions. They are bringing more greenery in their campuses and their areas of influence. They are also using new technologies for saving water, and energy efficiency is also one more concern.
And our correspondent Arun Sharma joins us now with more updates on this. Arun, did the Environment Minister make a strong pitch for ensuring that developing countries like India get green technology at affordable cost at the right time?
Absolutely, Munmun. Now, we have often seen that the government and the corporate sector do interact on issues like development, investment, infrastructure. This is one of those rare moments and occasion when private sector or the corporate sector is interacting with the government in order to, or primarily on the issue of climate change or as far as environment is concerned. Yes, Environment Minister Prakash Javadekar making it a strong point that technology should be available, technology related to renewable sources of energy should be available to the corporate sector at a very economic cost. Because Munmun, we have often seen that these multinational companies, because today when Mr. Javadekar, he interacted with all these corporate leaders, these are the CEOs of those companies which are multinational in nature. That means they are also having their, installing capacities in India and in various other countries. So now it is often seen, Munmun, that these corporate sector, wherever the technology that is cost-efficient technology related to renewable sources of energy is available in other countries, they're actually investing in those technology and in those capacities. But when it comes to India, the renewable sources of energy and the technology related to these renewable sources of energy are not cost-efficient in nature. And that's the reason the corporate sector of our country, primarily in India, do not invest much on the sources of energy which are, renewable sources or the clean energy in nature. That's the reason why Environment Minister today pitched in for these corporate sector that they should, of course, share the best practices of various other countries as to how can the best practices for renewable sources of energy from other countries can be brought into our country. Second, how can these technology be incentivized? Third, how can they be made available to the corporate sector, which are economic in nature? So these are some of the big highlights that were discussed when Mr. Prakash Javadekar, the Environment Minister, interacted with the global CEOs or primarily the CEOs of these multinational companies. Munmun?
Arun, did the minister also give an example of the Montreal Protocol where there was a provision that there should be compensation for any additional expenditure that is incurred, and how lack of a provision like that now is coming in the way of green investment?
Oh, absolutely. So Mr. Javadekar had talked about incentivizing all those corporate sector, primarily those who are investing in the green technologies or the clean infrastructure. Second, importantly, he has also ensured and reiterated the fact that India is committed to achieve its NDC. That's the nationally developed or primarily nationally achieved goal as far as the climate change is concerned. So when we talk about the NDC, that's the national determined contribution. The important part is that the emission intensity intensity should be about 30 to 35% by 2030. So that's an important target that India is focusing upon. And without taking on board the corporate sector of our country, this emission intensity cannot be reduced going forward. Second important, and that's a big highlight, Munmun, let me tell you this, that 40% of our installed capacity of the electric generation, that should be completely renewable in nature by 2030. So that's an important target. So until and unless the corporate sector of our country, big multinational companies do not come on board and start investing in the green energy and clean infrastructure, this 40% target of renewable sources of energy by 2030 seems to be, not achievable. And that's the reason why government interacted with the corporate sector. Last but not the least, it's about increasing the forest cover primarily in our country. Now, creating a carbon sink of approximately 3 billion tons of carbon sink, that's an important part so that, a green infrastructure can be created. And the way we are increasing our forest cover, that is something noteworthy. And in this context, only the corporate sector do have to come on board so that a green and a clean infrastructure can be created. India already, going forward as far as the solar generation capacity is concerned, we'll be achieving our target of 175 gigawatts of, renewable sources of energy by 2022. So these are massive targets that India is looking forward. But yes, technology is the key word. That means hashtag technology to be implemented in economic technology should be brought into India.
Absolutely. Thank you, Arun, for bringing us those updates. Prime Minister Narendra Modi will today chair the Virtual Global Investor Roundtable, or VGIR. The VGIR is being organized by the Ministry of Finance and the Government of India and the National Investment and Infrastructure Fund. It is an exclusive dialogue between leading global institutional investors, Indian business leaders and the highest decision makers from the Government of India and financial market regulators. The event is aimed at providing an opportunity to deliberate on further accelerating growth of international investments in India. The roundtable takes place this evening. Prime Minister will be chairing the Virtual Global Investor Roundtable today. That's the focus of VGIR: economic investment, outlook, structural reforms and path to $5 trillion economy. In Jammu and Kashmir, dates for the first ever District Development Council elections in the Union Territory has been announced. Polling will be held in 280 constituencies in 8 phases from the 28th of November. Refugees from Pakistan will be able to exercise their franchise for the first time in 70 years. Besides that, elections for the vacant seats of sarpanchs and panchs and urban local bodies will also be held simultaneously with the DDC polls. State Election Commissioner has said that polling will take place through electronic voting machines, while postal ballots will be available for COVID-19 patients in isolation, senior citizens and physically unwell patients. With the announcement of DDC polls, Model Code of Conduct has come into effect. The first formal notification for the first phase of elections will be issued today. The term of DDC will be for 5 years.
जिनका किसी कारण से अगर इलेक्टोरल वोट नहीं बना था, स्टेट में नहीं बना था, उनकी एलिजिबिलिटी अब जो हो गई है नहीं, तो वो भी वोट कर पाएंगे. तो उसमें ज़्यादा तो एक यही ग्रुप है जो आपने बताया. और otherwise it has to be ordinary resident, citizen of India, ordinarily residing here, as in the People Representation Act.
The State Election Commissioner also said that the election process will be held under tight security arrangements.
जम्मू कश्मीर की इलेक्शन के लिए सिक्योरिटी अरेंजमेंट्स एक इम्पॉर्टेंट चीज़ है. एंड पिछले 10-15 दिन में इसमें काफ़ी चर्चा हुई है. जो कंसर्न लॉ एंड ऑर्डर मशीनरी के सीनियर अफसर हैं, इसलिए सरकार ने ये 2 कमेटियां बनाई. और कमेटी वाज हेडेड बाय द होम सेक्रेटरी, एंड द होम सेक्रेटरीज कमेटी विद कंसर्न्ड ऑफिसर्स, द इनपुट्स फ्रॉम आईजीपी जम्मू, आईजीपी कश्मीर हैज़ गॉन इनटू दिस थिंग्स, एंड वी विल बी मेकिंग एडिक्वेट अरेंजमेंट्स.
Permanent representative to the United Nations, T.S. Tirumurthy, on Wednesday announced that India's annual resolution on the issue of counterterrorism was co-sponsored by over 75 countries and adopted by consensus in the first committee of the UN General Assembly. In a tweet, Tirumurthy said that India is at the forefront of counterterrorism. He said he was delighted that the annual resolution tabled by India on measures to prevent terrorists from acquiring weapons of mass destruction was co-sponsored by more than 75 countries and adopted by consensus in the first committee of the UN General Assembly. India, a victim of state-sponsored cross-border terrorism, has been at the forefront in highlighting the serious threat to international peace and security emanating from acquisition of weapons of mass destruction by terrorist groups. Union Minister for Science and Technology, Earth Sciences, Dr. Harshvardhan today announced Gandhi Young Technological Innovation Awards 2020 for Life Sciences via video conferencing. While addressing the event, he lauded Prime Minister Narendra Modi's conviction for science and technology.
These facilities are available to the young people of India right now. And at the helm of affairs is a man who is an extreme, I would say, visionary, a man who knows how to pick up the great idea, how to convert that idea into a program, how to convert that idea into a vision, and then to ensure that that vision is also translated into delivery for people, and then to how to monitor the implementation of that vision and idea, and then how to convert it into perceptible and measurable change for the society. So this is all, I always say that the present time is the most ideal time for India to grow. It is the most ideal time for the young people also to prove their worth. And it is also the most appropriate time for the scientific community to actually show their, strength and power and their vision.
Union Minister Dr. Harshvardhan urged the youth to take inspiration from issues people face at ground and find their solutions in laboratories.
It is no rocket science to develop a dream. Pick up any good idea from anywhere. Look at the people around you. Look at the India around you. Look at the people who are living in the villages. Look at the poor people, the downtrodden, the have-nots, and see what they are suffering from. And look at, when you are working inside your laboratories, you will see that there are so many things that the scientists have already done. And there are so many ideas that you have been taught about.
In his keynote address at the Diamond Jubilee Webinar 2020, India's National Security, the Decade Ahead, Raksha Mantri Rajnath Singh said that India made all efforts to improve its relations with neighbouring countries. As a result, today India enjoys very warm relations with its neighbours.
One of the most important elements of India's friend and the security policy is characterized by the neighborhood first initiative. Right from 2014, Prime Minister Modi invested substantial personal capital to ensure that this relationship was built and reinforced to create a positive and progressive partnership. The results of this initiative are evident. With the exception of Pakistan, given its agenda of fueling terrorism, India has improved its relations with all neighbors.
Well, let's now go across to External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar, who is inaugurating the India-Nordic-Baltic conclave together with ministerial dignitaries from the region.
And I appreciate the efforts of Team CII and Team MEA in putting this event together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jaishankar, for your inaugural address, which really sets the tone for this conclave. And we deeply appreciate yours being with us and sharing your thoughts and your vision. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for that address. May I now invite His Excellency, Mr. Jeppe Sebastian Kofod, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Denmark, to give his remarks and speech, please.
Well, let's focus now on how India is tackling the COVID-19 pandemic, and India continues to achieve success in its fight against COVID-19, with recovery rate continuing to remain at more than 92%. More than 55,000 patients have recovered from the virus in the last 24 hours, adding the total of those who've been discharged so far to cross 77,11,000 in India. Also recording just 704 deaths in a day, India's fatality rate has plunged to less than 2%. India's caseload has also slid, registering just 5,825 cases of COVID-19 in the last 24 hours, cutting the total number of active cases to 5,27,962 of COVID-19 in India. So India reaching the 92% recovery rate, which is among the best in the world. As for the latest ICMR data, a total of 12,09,425 samples of COVID-19 were tested in the last 24 hours, adding up to a total number of 11,42,08,384. And in Midday Prime, it's time for news and updates from the world of business. Ajay Mishra, my colleague, joins us with all the business news. Ajay, how are the US polls impacting markets in India?
I think it's all positive, and the markets are currently trading in the green, and I'll give you the details. The S&P BSE Sensex gained 600 points to reach 41,240 levels, while the broader Nifty 50 index topped the 12,000 mark for the very first time since October 21st, 2020. The Nifty 50 index rose to around 12,080 levels, the highest level in the more than 8 months. Among the individual stocks, the SBI rose over 6% after Q2 results and was the top Sensex gainer, followed by HCL Technology, which was up 4%. Besides other technology stocks, Tech Mahindra and Infosys were also up 2% each. All the Nifty sectoral indices were trading in the green, led by Nifty PSU Bank Index up 3%. The broader markets were also up, but not to the extent of the benchmark. The S&P BSE Mid Cap and Small Cap indices were both ruling 0.8% higher. A total of 127 companies, including Berger Paint, Imami and Godrej Consumer Products, are scheduled to announce their results today. I'm joined by our stock analyst Naren Badava over phone line. Thanks very much, Naren. What are the key reasons why the markets are, gaining each day? Is there a fundamental at place or just a technical reason?
Thank you for having me, Ajay. See, markets are financial markets enjoys the certainty. So the U.S. election was a major uncertainty. Now we are close to the results. I think something is coming out, and there is a clear direction in that field. So markets are taking it positively only. So world over, the stocks have rallied, and it's just because of the quantitative easing which is coming in US, and the quantum is indicated by the Democrats also that is going to come in a larger amount.
Valid point, Narendra, but what are the key reasons, and also the corporate results are playing some role out here, or do you have some specific stocks in mind that will have a good Q2 numbers going forward?
The Q2 numbers are quite good as compared to Q1, and if we take the EPS of the Nifty, it is around 670, 680. So our markets are around 18 PE, which is not that high, and India has emerged as a great destination because of the China factor and what has happened in the COVID. So it is emerging as a good destination for investment, and a lot of money is coming to India to chase these stocks.
Thanks very much, Naren, for talking to us on DD News, and we're also waiting for the Prime Minister to interact with the investors, because that is going to be the key when it comes to the real investment into the economy, and the Prime Minister will individually speak to the investors, especially the Sovereign Wealth Fund and the pension funds going forward. Moving on, providing relief to thousands of home buyers, the Supreme Court has ruled that the period of allotment for a housing unit to a home buyer has to be considered from the date of builder-buyer agreement and not from the date of registration of project under Real Estate Regulation and Development Act 2016. Home buyers have welcomed this order, saying that the Apex Court has restored the sanctity of the builder-buyer agreement, and the developers whose project have been delayed stand of linking the allotment or the handover of flats with the date of RERA registration has been dispelled. Well, that's on the Business Prime for today. One more.
Thanks, Ajay, for that. And now a look at what's making news across the globe. Latest updates on COVID-19 from across the world. And in that, the virus has so far infected more than 4 crore 84 lakh people, while 3 crore 46 lakh people have recovered worldwide. The viral disease has claimed over 12,30,000 lives globally. It continues to ravage the most in the US and Brazil. The US tops in the world with cases surpassing 98 lakh and number of fatalities crossing 2,39,000, following by US and Brazil in terms of death toll with over 1,61,000 lives lost due to COVID-19 in Brazil. Britain's head towards a new 4-week-long COVID-19 lockdown amid soaring cases of the viral disease. Restaurants in London saw heavy crowd thronging to dine as non-essential establishments will remain closed in the country for at least a month. People thronged streets hours before the lockdown came into force. Meanwhile, authorities have urged to stay at home to combat a surge in new infections that scientists say could, if unchecked, cause more deaths than a first wave. UK has so far over 10,99,060 cases of COVID-19 with more than 47,740 deaths. Australia has signed 2 deals to buy 40 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines from Novavax and 10 million from Pfizer and BioNTech. The deal, worth about 1.5 trillion Australian dollars, was followed by earlier agreements of worth 1.7 billion Australian dollars with AstraZeneca and CSL Limited for a total of nearly 85 million vaccine doses. Meanwhile, the country has not registered any new case of COVID-19 in the last 6 days from hotspots. Australia's total number of coronavirus cases is over 27,620 with 907 deaths so far.